The Washington Wizards 2024-2025 NBA season kicks off this Thursday when the Washington Wizards meet the Boston Celtics in Capital One Arena in DC. And with that comes year 2 of the Wizards rebuild, led by President Michael Winger and GM Will Dawkins. So what I want to do in this video is break down this upcoming season for the Washington Wizards, giving player breakdowns, potential trade ideas down the line, contract breakdowns, lineup breakdowns, everything this season will entail for the Washington Wizards. I want to break it down in this video. But before I get into all that, make sure to subscribe, as this channel will be the #1 place for any Wizards content this entire season. After all 82 Wizards games this season, I will be doing a post-game breakdown on this channel of what happened in that game, because as I'm about to get into, this season will not be an easy one. So if you don't want to slog through these games, I will be here for you to break these games down so you don't have to. But without further ado, let's get into it. To start, I want to look at the goals for the Washington Wizards this upcoming season, because obviously a team's long-term goal is to inevitably win a championship and more championships and create an organization that has a championship foundation. The Wizards at the current moment are not that, and this season is not one where you will see us competing for a championship. But what does this season entail if we're not competing for a championship? I believe this season sees 3 goals: development, asset accumulation, and tanking. I think it's pretty easy to look at a bad team like the Wizards and just chalk up their entire season to going and getting a top pick. While that's not completely untrue, I think there's more nuance to the conversation of what a young team is building when they are trying to be bad. I'll touch on this later when I go over the individual players that I want to see development out of. But development within young players is not something that just happens overnight as players get older in age. It is something that has to be curated by an organization, by the coaching staff, by the front office, and by the player to fully see it through. As well as that, when you see a veteran player on a young tanking team, that player is not automatically a so-called tank commander. While that might be a byproduct of the player's presence, that player is often there for multiple reasons, whether that be to get an asset down the line or to show a young player how to play the game the right way and how to be a leader. So I say all that to say, yes, the Wizards are going to be bad. Very bad, likely historically bad, but that does not mean this season is a wasted one or a useless one. This is a season that is going to be extremely key in being a pillar to the Wizards becoming a successful organization. So yes, while the W's and L's might be very lopsided, this is a very important season for the Washington Wizards. Now I want to look at the actual roster for this Wizards team. As it currently stands, we have 15 of 15 standard slots filled, as well as all 3 two-way slots filled. Now as you can see in front of you, I've compiled what I believe to be the Wizards roster hierarchy in kind of pyramid form, with tier 1 being the franchise player, tier 2 being the franchise building blocks, tier 3 being the potential building blocks, tier 4 being the tradable vets, tier 5 being the guys barely holding on, and tier 6 being, of course, our Udonis Haslem, Anthony Gill. Now how I want to break this down is by going tier by tier, explaining why I have the player I have in that spot, and just how I foresee this season going for them, and just the things I want to see from that player. Now as you can see, tier 1 being the franchise player does not have anyone in that slot, because frankly I don't believe we have that player on our roster just quite yet. Now as I'll get into later, I love some of our guys just below that in Bilal Coulibaly, Alex Sarr, Bub Carrington. I don't believe that we have our guy. We don't have our LeBron, our Giannis, our Jokic, etc., etc. And that honestly is what this season is all about. As I explained earlier, we have a lot of goals to this season, but at its core, after all the development, after the asset accumulation, this season is about positioning ourselves to be the guy picking #1 on draft night so we can pick our guy to change our franchise and be our franchise pillar. Now while I do dabble in my fair share of draft talk, I am no expert. I'm not well versed enough to give an accurate opinion, but from what I have heard from guys who are tapped in, this is shaping up to be one of the best drafts of the past decade, with guys like Cooper Flagg at Duke and Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper at Rutgers. Now moving into our second tier of our pyramid being our franchise building blocks, let's start with #2 pick Alex Sarr. Now hopefully most of you know Alex Sarr was our 2nd overall pick in this last 2024 NBA draft, and obviously he's going to be a massive piece going forward with our franchise. Now as I touched on a bit earlier, development is not something that happens for young guys when they roll out of bed one morning. It's something that you can see game after game, season after season, as they get older and older and progress through their career. And that's something that will be no different for Alex Sarr. So I compiled a little list of things that I think we can see in his development that will signify that he is moving along in his progression as a basketball player to being a key building block for the future of the Washington Wizards. So to start, I want to talk about what might be the central problem or issue with Alex Sarr's game. Is he a 4 or a 5 at the NBA level? I think both positions have their pros and cons for Alex going forward. As a 5, it more naturally fits the 7-1 frame, as well as that he is in more control control on the offensive side of the ball of the actions that we run, whether that be a pick and roll or a pick and pop, giving him the option to pop, showing off his three-point game, or to roll, getting the ball in the short roll, hitting a corner, or just attacking the basket himself. But also as a 5, he'll be delegated more roles, such as being more physical. At the 5 spot in the NBA, you have to be a physical guy, as well as that he will have to be a good rebounder, able to close possessions on the defensive side of the ball. And those are two things that I don't think he's super great at right now. And obviously as the 4, those are kind of to the wayside, where he doesn't have to be as physical, nor does he have to grab as many defensive rebounds to close possessions. It also opens up a new problem where he has to be a 4 on the offensive side of the ball, where he can get kind of clunky in the half court, having a guy at 7'1" operating on the wing who isn't the best floor spacer in the world. Now, I do believe Alex Sarr will inevitably be best suited as a 5 in the NBA. He will play both positions this year, likely starting at the 4 next to center Jonas Valanciunas, who can kind of delegate those defensive rebounding and physicality issues away from him, as well as that he will run the 5 with some different lineups this season. And I think it'll be an interesting thing to monitor what lineups Alex Sarr sees the most success in. Is it at the 4? Is it at the 5? That'll just be something to monitor for Alex Sarr's development down the line. So now, knowing some of the pieces of development for Alex Sarr in his rookie year, what should we expect from an Alex Sarr rookie season? So in Alex Sarr's rookie season, I would expect to see someone who is a strong defender from day one, both on the perimeter and protecting the rim, whether that be on the weak side or just guarding a pick and roll, as well as that he's a fluid mover who will find success in fast-paced offenses. When you're moving in transition, having guys go up the floor, that is where he can really show off his size and athleticism, as well as that just the things that I listed earlier for his development. What position does he see the most success in? How physical is he being? And the shot diet is something to monitor as well, as he has a tendency to rely on the 3 ball more than he should. Now, moving to our second guy in the franchise building blocks tier, I want to talk about Bilal Coulibaly. Now, for all intents and purposes, Bilal Coulibaly was effectively the only young guy on the Wizards roster last year, having been the 7th overall pick in the 2023 NBA draft. So he was the subject of a lot of optimism from Wizards fans entering the first year of a rebuild. And Bilal showed us a lot of things to be excited for going forward. He was often our best defender most nights, guarding the likes of Steph Curry to the LeBron Jameses, showing his versatility on the defensive side of the ball, as well as that showing potential on the offensive side of the ball, coming in shooting a lot better than expected at a 34% clip from the 3-point line, as well as that showing himself to be an athletic force in transition. But what does year 2 for Bilal Coulibaly look like? Well, I have some things that I want to see from Bilal Coulibaly going into year 2 that I think would show improvement from year 1. Number 1 being on-ball creation. As I just mentioned, Bilal was really good in transition and moving in fast-paced offenses, but the game is going to slow down, and when it does, Bilal needs to find a way to be effective other than just relying on raw athleticism. So him being able to slow the game down and create on the ball, off the dribble for himself and others, creating advantages, is something that he will need to take a step forward with this season. And kind of tying into that, Bilal needs to look more comfortable when he's out there on the court. He has a lot of awkward moments, which isn't irregular for a young guy like Bilal, but it would be nice to see him more under control and just more in control of himself when he's out there on the floor in year 2. And while I did say I do think Bilal exceeded expectations shooting the ball last season, I would like to see him prove it another year that he can shoot around that 34% clip, or come into this next season with improved mechanics showing that he is actively improving on the shooting. Now, with all that said, what does year 2 for Bilal Coulibaly look like? So year 2 for Bilal Coulibaly should look like guarding the opposing team's best player every single night, as confirmed by GM Will Dawkins and head coach Brian Keefe. Bilal will be getting that assignment nightly, so keeping him at the same defensive intensity he had last season and maybe adding some is going to be something you should expect from Bilal Coulibaly. As well as that, an overall bump in offensive usage. He only put up 9 shots a game last year, and we should exceed that by hopefully 2 or 3 shots plus improved efficiency across the board. Just Bilal getting more of a load offensive, and as well as that, hopefully we can see improvement as some of the more aforementioned stuff where I talked about on-ball creation, shooting stuff, just an overall improvement of the stuff I just said previously. Next up, we will talk about Bub Carrington, who was our 14th overall pick in this last 2024 NBA draft. And if you're unfamiliar, the pick that we selected Bub Carrington with was one of the assets we got in the trade that we sent Deni Avdija to Portland on draft night. So going forward, Bub Carrington is going to be a massive piece of the future, as we gave up Deni Avdija, who was one of our best young players last season, to acquire Bub Carrington in the draft. And I think that should excite a lot of Wizards fans because Bub Carrington showed a lot of good stuff in college, in summer league, and in the preseason for Wizards fans to be excited about. In college, Bub Carrington was absolutely automatic in the mid-range, coming off ball screens and getting to his spot, shooting almost 50% from that area in college. As well as that, he made some good plays passing the ball in college, coming off those pick and rolls, maybe not being able to get to his mid-range and hitting the roll man. And a lot of that stuff did translate over into summer league and into preseason, but something that I wasn't necessarily expecting to be such a high level was Bub Carrington's defense and rebounding, which he really showed off in summer league. But knowing all this, going into his first NBA season, what are some things that we can expect development-wise to see out of Bub Carrington this season? The main area of critique for Bub Carrington's game going into the NBA is how much pressure can he put on the rim. In preseason, summer league, college, Bub Carrington did struggle to get to the rim a little bit, and that'll be something very important to see going forward. Can he start to put pressure on the rim as the season goes forward, which will open up his entire game offensive. His efficiency also will be something to monitor, not necessarily something to worry about, but definitely something to monitor. In college, he didn't shoot it great, shooting around 41% from the field and 32% from three, and a lot of that kind of held true in summer league and in preseason. So monitoring his efficiency, although it probably won't be great year one, as most rookies do struggle with efficiency, just keeping an eye on it will be important for Bub Carrington going forward. And lastly, what will Bub Carrington's playmaking level be like at the NBA? As I mentioned before, Bub Carrington was a good passer in college, but a lot of them weren't necessarily super advanced reads, usually just hitting a roll man or hitting swing for a three. But in the NBA, what will Bub Carrington look like passing the ball? Will those reads continue to develop and get more advanced as he goes along? That will be something to monitor as well. Now, transitioning to our last guy in the franchise building blocks here, I want to talk a little bit about Kyshawn George. The Washington Wizards again traded up to get Kyshawn George, hitting up from the 26th pick to the 24th pick to pick Kyshawn George out of Miami. Now, Kyshawn is a very unique player in the sense that he's a 6'8", almost point forward type with a lot of playmaking chops, overall a great feel for the game, and can shoot the ball extremely well. As well as that, he competes on the defensive side of the ball and is really just a player made for the modern game of basketball. But like some of our other franchise building blocks, there are still some things that I think we can see him develop on throughout the season to show he is progressing. To start, although I did say he has a good handle, sometimes he can get a bit carried away and frankly just do too much when he's dribbling the ball, and that can lead to some turnovers and just some overall poor decision making from Kyshawn. So that's something we will definitely want to see him progress through in his rookie season. Kyshawn also isn't the best athlete in the world, and while that's not really something he can improve on, I think it's important to monitor how much does that potentially hurt him. Can he still attack the basket, if at all? Can he go up with the trees and still make layups despite his lack of athleticism? So just monitoring how much being a negative athlete potentially hurts Kyshawn. And while I do think Kyshawn is a serviceable to good defender on the ball, sometimes he does have a tendency to fall asleep off the ball, which is just important because that's where I think he'll spend most of his time guarding guys off ball, guarding guys moving off screens, different things like that. So being able to stay alert, intensive, getting in lanes is going to be important for Kyshawn moving forward. So these four guys are the guys that I see as future building blocks for the Washington Wizards franchise. And I spent a lot of time on this group because I think it's important to highlight that yes, we have young talent and we have young talent on the roster, but that young talent is not just going to turn over and become good overnight. There are things that we as fans can cognitively watch for as the season progresses to understand if our players are progressing as they should. Because to reiterate one more time, although this season is about racking up L's, there are more to watch within this season, like the development of the aforementioned young guys, because those four are the young guys that can help change this franchise. Then the next group of guys I want to talk about here as we move through the roster is the guys in the potential building blocks tier. Starting off with Jordan Poole, this was definitely the player I thought longest and hardest on, as I just didn't know where exactly he fit, but I think the potential building blocks is the perfect spot for Jordan Poole. And I think this is the perfect spot for him because I don't really know what the future for Jordan Poole lies in a Wizard jersey. I don't think he's a guy that will end up getting traded, mostly because his contract, in my opinion, is something we're just not going to be able to trade to another team, as they probably just won't want it. And I also really don't foresee Jordan Poole being a part of this future core, as the four that I named earlier as being a part of the future core are all younger. Jordan Poole is a good 3-4 years older than they are, so I just really don't see him being one, traded, or two, being a part of this future core. And just to recap from Jordan Poole's last season, for the first 85% or so of the season, he was more or less terrible as a two guard. But when Tyus Jones went out with injury last season, Jordan Poole stepped up as a point guard and played really well. So all I really want from Jordan Poole this season is to simply just play better. I know that's not the most riveting analysis in the world, but it helps all parties involved if Jordan Poole just plays a little bit better. If he plays better, that can boost his trade value down the road, and if he plays better, maybe he can see himself into the future of the Washington Wizards. So to put it simply, just have a better season than you did last year, with the ball in your hands, being the primary point guard like he will be this season. Then moving over to the the only other guy in this tier, I want to talk a little bit about Corey Kispert. Now, Corey is coming off a season where he basically put up career highs across the board outside of three-point shooting, and even still, he shot around 38% from the three-point line. Corey continues to be one of the more lethal shooting options in the entire league. He's a fantastic cutter off the ball, and he improved off the catch, taking guys off the dribble when they play him off the three-point line. And in my opinion, Corey Kispert is genuinely maybe the most underrated player in the entirety of the NBA. And for that, Corey Kispert was rewarded with a new contract extension that literally happened at the time of recording this only 2 days ago. And fitting with the player, I think Corey's contract is also super underrated at only 4 years, $54 million. Now a career year, a new contract, all those things ring as positive. Why is he in the potential building blocks tier? Well, similar to his former teammate Deni Avdija, Corey Kispert is simply just an attractive asset in the current NBA landscape and is just a bit older than what our core is currently. And while I would love for Corey to stay as he's one of my favorite current Wizards, I just can't say for certain he will. If the front office is looking to acquire more young talent, they might have to use Corey Kispert to go and do it. Now let's take a look at tier 4, the tradable vets, which includes more than 1/3 of our roster. And starting off this tier with Kyle Kuzma, I can't say this lightly enough, Kyle Kuzma needs to be traded by this trade deadline. Almost since the day Kyle Kuzma stepped foot in DC, he's been in trade rumors again and again and again, and somehow has evaded them to this day. Now don't get me wrong, I love Kuz, and he's been genuinely one of my favorite players since the 2020s, but we are a rebuilding team in need of young talent, and Kyle Kuzma serves as our best chance to acquire another first-round pick in this draft, upcoming drafts, and just overall opportunity to get younger and to continue our rebuild. And it was reported last trade deadline that the Dallas Mavericks were looking at acquiring Kuzma and offered 2 first-round picks to do it at last trade deadline before the Wizards and Kuzma both said no. Kyle Kuzma had an extremely underrated season last year, and I think it'll be hard for him to replicate that again, as well as that every time he's on the court he's liable to get injured, as that is just the reality of sports. So please, I'm begging the Washington Wizards front office, for the sake of us acquiring young talent and freeing up minutes for the young talent we already have, please trade Kyle Kuzma. Now the next guy I want to talk about as being a potentially tradable vet is center Jonas Valanciunas. Now Jonas comes to DC from the New Orleans Pelicans on a 3-year, $300 million deal, and widely the expectation was, hey, contenders can't offer you the money that we can, we'll offer you that money in exchange, we're probably going to flip you down the road for some assets. Now I still think that's more or less the case, whether it be this trade deadline, next trade deadline, this offseason, next offseason, whatever. I still think that's the case, but I also think there's some more underlying reasons for why Jonas Valanciunas is here. And I already made an entire video about what I think Jonas Valanciunas can bring to the team besides obviously flipping him down the road. So just to rehash myself a little bit, kind of what I touched on earlier, I think Jonas Valanciunas can help Alex Sarr specifically be a guy who can learn to set big body screens to get rebounds. Jonas Valanciunas can kind of hold Alex Sarr's hands through these first couple years and show him the ropes of how to be a true traditional NBA big man, as well as that just being a leader, an 11-year vet in the NBA, showing the young guys how to operate in the NBA. And I think Malcolm Brogdon is in a similar situation to JV, where he'll probably get flipped, or at least in discussion to be flipped at the trade deadline, but his main reason to be here, while also to get assets, is to show some of the young guys the ropes, specifically in Malcolm Brogdon's case, like guys like Bub Carrington, Kyshawn George, just the more guards of the world, how to play the game in the NBA the right way. But as a small caveat to Malcolm Brogdon, I think he's a bit different in the sense that his contract is expiring this next offseason, so there might be a more rush to pressure to get that trade done for Malcolm Brogdon this deadline, rather than with JV they can wait past even this next season to trade him because his contract is guaranteed for those few more years. And now I want to group 2 guys together in this tier, being Marvin Bagley III and Richaun Holmes. I'm grouping these guys together as, for one, they're both the backup big men, and 2, they both have 12.5 and 12.6 respectively expiring contracts, which could be valuable for potential trades. But like I said, these guys are both going to be the backup big, so maybe they put up some good minutes off the bench this season and some contender wants to get some money off, so they give us a bad contract, we'll give you some expiring contract, plus they can get some backup center play, but that's where they will get their potential trade value as being tradable vets. And then finishing off this 4th tier, we do have Saddiq Bey. Now we did sign Saddiq Bey to a 3-year, $19 million contract in the offseason, but Saddiq did tear his ACL late last season, so I've heard conflicting reports that he either might miss this entire season or just come back in like mid-March. But either way, we're basically paying him to rehab himself, so when he does come back either this season or next, we can see if we can turn that relatively cheap deal, only $6 million a year, into something of value if he does come out and play really well. That's a trade asset asset for us down the line. So based on just all the tier 4 guys, I compiled a little list here of what each player needs to do to reach their max value and what I think their max value is. So as you can see here, Marvin Bagley, Rashawn Holmes, they're around the same. Could net some second round picks plus some salary filler guys as they're both competing for the backup center spot. Jonas Valanciunas needs to consistently start, put up average numbers, and he could potentially, if he has a good season, net a late first round pick, but some seconds and some salary filler. Kyle Kuzma, as I mentioned in his section of below, he could net maybe multiple first round picks as well as some young talent. It's important for Malcolm Brogdon to stay healthy, and he could also net some second round picks similar to Jonas Valanciunas' value. And then for Saddiq Bey, all I really need him to do is get healthy, and we can kind of gauge that value next season. Then moving to the last section, I want to talk about some guys that are just barely holding on to their NBA life, holding on to the end of the roster for the Washington Wizards. Starting off the barely holding on tier is none other than Johnny Davis, who was the 10th overall pick in the 2022 NBA draft. Now, if you're not familiar, Johnny Davis's career up until this point has been nothing but a disappointment where he can't get on the NBA floor, and when he does, he looks nervous, scared, and often makes the wrong play, either missing layups, missing shots. It's just been an embarrassment all around, and it was pretty easy to put him in this tier. I imagine the front office will decline his option for next season sometime in the next coming weeks, which means he will be a free agent at the end of this year. So this season is not only a tryout for the Wizards, but the NBA at large to see if he can stay in the league. And it's honestly a pretty similar situation for Patrick Baldwin Jr., as he was the 28th overall pick in the 2022 NBA draft. He hasn't been able to get on the NBA court, and when he hasn't made the most of it, so that means he's probably going to be on his last leg, similarly getting his option declined for next season. So being a free agent and just having a general league tryout to see if he can stay in the league. And it's honestly a bit of a weird one with Tristan Vukovic. He was our second round pick in the 2023 NBA draft, and when he came over from overseas mid-season, he honestly looked really good whenever he was on the court, but this offseason was just a bad one for him. He only played one summer league game for an undisclosed reason, and in that game he was poor. In the preseason he's been poor, so he's going to probably spend most of his season with the Capital City Go-Go this year. Vuk likely has more security than Johnny Davis or PBJ, but still the leash for second round picks isn't super long, so he'll need to have a good showing in the G League and NBA this season to keep his spot. And finishing up this tier will be Justin Champagnie and Jared Butler. Both Champagnie and Butler will be on two-way contracts to begin the season, and honestly, whenever these two have played in NBA minutes, whether that be the Summer League, the preseason, or just regular NBA minutes, I've been impressed to the point where I think they deserve a genuine shot, and Jared Butler should get a real shot at rotational minutes, even to begin the season with Malcolm Brogdon being out with injury. But like I said, whenever these guys play, I think they do a really good job. At the end of the day, the NBA is a super talented league, so there's not enough spots for everybody. But I think these guys are NBA level, and they'll just have to show it this season. And then last but not least, we have Anthony Gill, your favorite player's favorite player. Anthony Gill is the consummate pro and the best locker room guy you can have on your team. He helps out the young guys. He's basically just a coach as a player. Like I said earlier in the video, he's our Udonis Haslem. Everyone loves having an Anthony Gill on their team, and we have him. He's the longest tenured Wizard. If you don't like Anthony Gill, you're a bad person. So now that we know all about every single Wizards player and their role on this team, I think I've compiled what I believe to be the active depth chart for the 2024-2025 Washington Wizards. As you can see, everyone in green are the guys that I see in the active rotation if healthy, so that means we are going to run a 10-man rotation, which is what I believe we will end up doing. If they're in yellow, that means maybe one or two guys get hurt, then they'll hop in there. And if you're in the red, that usually means like fail safe, like we have the whole roster's damn near hurt, so you get a play in that sense. And if you have a little injury thing, like Brogdon is going to be out for the first couple weeks with an injury, the person below that, this being Bub Carrington, will likely fill that role, as well as that I have the Capital City Go-Go listed for some guys who will split time in the G League and with the regular roster. Now, I do feel very confident that the 10 guys I have listed in green are the guys in a fully healthy lineup that will be seeing regular rotation minutes day in, day out, but I do think there is some chance for you to change up the starting lineup depending on what looks you want to give another team. Like in this example, I could see us only going one big, moving Val to the bench, going Sarr to the 5, Kuz to the 4, Bilal to the 3, and either Brogdon or Kispert to the 2 to give some more playmaking and some more shooting in the lineup. Then another situation I could see would be keeping the double bigs, but also still wanting that playmaking slash shooting with that Corey or Brogdon gets, and just taking out Bilal. Granted, I don't love that. I want all our young guys playing as many minutes as they can, but if Brian Keefe, head coach, chooses to do that, he has that option. And then lastly, I just did some of my own predictions. I believe we'll finish 17-65 in the NBA, which will be the worst record in the league, hopefully positioning ourselves to get a top lottery pick. I think we'll have a great year from our rooks. I think Alex Sarr will win the Rookie of the Year. Bub Carrington and Kyshawn George will both make all rookie teams. I have some Wizard awards there. I think Corey Kispert is going to have a sneaky good year, averaging 17 points per game, and you can see all the rookie stats. I think Kuz will finally get traded, as I was pleading for earlier. I think Marvin Bagley and Malcolm Brogdon will get traded. Granted, a lot of this is just fan optimism, but just something fun to do at the end of the video there. But that's some of the predictions I have for this season. But yeah, that will be the video. I hope I shed some light on how I believe this season will go and how some of the individual players that seasons will go, some different trade stuff. I hope I really just shed some light on the Washington Wizards season to come. But yeah, make sure to subscribe to the channel. As I said earlier in the video, every single game, all 82, I will be doing breakdowns after it happens. So make sure to subscribe for all that best Wizards content on YouTube. But yeah, that's it.